You can feel it across the street right now. Stores closing earlier than they used to, local clinics cutting hours, neighbors talking about prices that rise faster than their income. Many families say the same thing: the ground feels less steady than it did a few years ago. These are not isolated signs. They point to a harder 2026, when a national slowdown will meet state budgets that are already stretched and communities that have little room left to adjust. The questions become unavoidable. What are the deeper forces behind these problems? How are different states managing the pressure on their finances, their services, and their people? Have any of them shown real progress, or are the warning signs still widening? Older residents see the strain first because they live with fixed incomes, thinner margins, and fewer options when public systems weaken. In this video, we will look closely at 10 states facing the highest exposure. Stay with us. Your hometown may be among the places entering this period with the least protection. Number 1. West Virginia. 20,000 residents have left West Virginia over the past several years, and employment has fallen by more than 9,000 jobs from early 2024 to early 2025. Both numbers point to a state that enters the national slowdown with less margin than most others. Population loss reduces the tax base. Job loss reduces household reserves. The combination creates a tighter space for public services that were already under strain. A closer look at the state's balance shows why this pressure builds quickly. Revenue growth has been slow for more than a decade. Several counties depend on a narrow set of industries with limited expansion. Local governments in the southern region carry growing maintenance costs for roads, utilities, and public buildings, and those costs rise while the population falls. Pension obligations add another layer. Annual payments must be made even when revenue softens, and that leaves fewer dollars for clinics, schools, and emergency services. Service exposure becomes clear in daily routines. Some clinics moved to reduced hours last year. A few public safety departments reported longer response times because of staffing limits. School districts in certain counties have consolidated campuses after enrollment fell. Residents notice these changes first. A cut of 1 hour here or a shift cancellation there eventually forms a pattern that older households cannot ignore. For seniors who rely on consistent transportation, medical access, and county programs, even slight adjustments create stress. Analysts who follow rural economies have flagged these signals for some time. One researcher from a regional university described West Virginia's position as stable only when conditions remain stable. That statement reflects a broader concern: downturns remove the thin buffer that keeps essential services functioning. When revenue declines, counties must choose between postponing maintenance, reducing staff, or delaying equipment replacement. Each option places additional weight on systems that have very limited elasticity. Human texture inside the state confirms the numbers. A retired maintenance worker in Raleigh County explained that he now drives nearly 40 miles for some appointments because the nearest location shifted to reduced days. A grocery cashier in the Northern Panhandle said her daughter's school merged classes after a staff departure. These experiences are simple and practical. They show how shrinking capacity works. It does not appear all at once. It appears through scattered adjustments that accumulate over time. West Virginia does not face collapse in a dramatic sense. The risk lies in quiet erosion if the national downturn becomes deep and prolonged. County budgets carry little cushion. Households carry modest savings. Public systems manage heavier tasks with fewer people. The impact remains manageable in steady conditions, but a harder 2026 could expose how narrow the buffer has become. The next state on this list holds a different set of vulnerabilities, shaped less by population decline and more by financial load, and the contrast helps explain why exposure varies so widely across the country. Number 2. Mississippi. A delivery truck crawls along a narrow road in Jackson late in the afternoon. The driver waits through a long line of cars because a nearby intersection now has only one functioning lane. Several residents say delays like this have become normal, and the change captures how daily life in Mississippi absorbs economic pressure. Poverty remains high. The state holds one of the highest poverty rates in the country, and median household income stays near the bottom nationwide. These numbers create a simple pattern. Households begin each month with little room for unexpected costs. When a slowdown pushes wages down or cuts hours, the effect shows up quickly. Lower earnings reduce local tax collections, which in turn limit how counties maintain infrastructure, utilities, and public services. Economic mechanics explain why conditions tighten this way. Growth relies heavily on sectors with modest wage trajectories. Several rural counties depend on agriculture and basic manufacturing, both of which are sensitive to fuel prices and supply disruptions. When expenses rise faster than output, employers slow hiring or trim shifts. Retail corridors in mid-sized towns report thinner foot traffic, which reduces sales tax revenue. School districts in parts of the Delta area face declining enrollment, and reduced population lowers state funding formulas. Everything feeds into the next layer. As capacity narrows, the state's ability to respond to a national downturn weakens. A regional analyst from a public policy institute warned that Mississippi's outlook stays fragile until wages rise faster than costs for several years. That condition has not materialized. Healthcare systems still struggle to staff rural clinics. Several hospitals reported financial strain last year, and some counties operate with limited emergency coverage during certain shifts. Economists say these gaps do not come from sudden shocks. They come from long periods of slow income growth combined with essential expenses that increase each year. During a short visit to a neighborhood outside Hattiesburg, a resident named Harold Thompson described how this pressure shapes his week. Harold is 59 and spent more than 30 years working in warehouse operations. He told me he now works part-time at a local hardware store after his previous job replaced several positions with automated systems. His wife manages a small home care service for seniors, but her hours vary depending on client budgets. Harold explained the situation with calm frustration. He said his utility bill absorbs more of his paycheck than before. He drives farther for regular checkups because the clinic closer to his home reduced appointments. He mentioned that groceries cost more and the store where he shops no longer carries some lower-priced items. When I asked how he plans ahead, he paused and said he is not sure how to keep everything together if hours drop again. His concerns match the economic data. Households with limited reserves feel the strain first and struggle the most when conditions tighten. Mississippi shows a clear pattern. Income grows slowly, costs rise steadily. Public systems stretch themselves to maintain coverage. A deeper national downturn leaves limited fallback positions. Number 3, Louisiana. Louisiana faces pressure that differs from Mississippi. Mississippi struggles with low household income and steady outmigration. Louisiana carries those issues but adds heavier service demands and climate-exposed communities which combine to tighten conditions in a different way. State records from early 2024 show a poverty rate close to 1/5 of the population, one of the highest in the country. Median household income remains low, and several parishes report stagnant wage growth. These numbers shape daily routines. Families enter each month with limited savings, and unexpected expenses push them into difficult choices. In coastal areas, some residents now budget for temporary relocations during severe weather seasons. A few inland parishes report reduced hours at local clinics. Several school districts have merged programs to manage declining enrollment and constrained budgets. The structural explanation centers on 3 elements. First, revenue growth stays uneven, especially in regions dependent on oil-gas tourism or port activity. These industries fluctuate with national demand and global prices. When revenue dips, parishes delay infrastructure maintenance or postpone equipment upgrades. Second, insurance costs have risen in many coastal and near-coastal zones. Higher premiums increase household expenses and strain small businesses. Third, storm recovery remains expensive. Rebuilding efforts after major events require federal support, but matching funds and local contributions still create pressure on parish budgets. In my humble opinion, these overlapping issues place Louisiana in a narrow position. Residents with steady jobs still face rising utility bills, transportation costs, and insurance obligations. Parishes with smaller tax bases must choose which services to maintain at full capacity and which to adjust. Many residents accept these changes as routine because they have lived with similar patterns for years. That acceptance does not lessen the impact. It only means households adapt repeatedly even when the margin is thin. Current conditions reflect this pattern. Several hospitals reported staffing shortages last year. Some sheriff departments in rural parishes split shifts more carefully to manage limited personnel. Local governments have taken steps to strengthen drainage systems, but progress varies depending on funding and available contractors. Retail corridors in mid-sized towns continue to see turnover with a mix of new openings and closures. Overall employment has held steady in some regions, while falling in others, creating an uneven map of opportunity. A near-future outlook shows modest improvement in certain sectors, but limited slack overall. Tourism may rise if national travel remains stable, but that depends on household budgets across the country. Oil and gas activity depends on global markets. Infrastructure repair relies on consistent funding streams that are not guaranteed. Coastal protection projects move forward, though timelines remain long and budgets tight. Household costs, especially insurance and transportation, appear unlikely to fall in the short term. Louisiana approaches the next few years with a combination of long-standing economic limits and rising service demands. The direction depends on national conditions, local revenue, and the ability of households to continue adjusting under steady financial pressure. Number 4, Louisiana. I keep telling myself tomorrow will feel easier, an older woman said outside a grocery store in Decatur. Her name is Alma Ross. She is 76 and worked most of her life in a food processing plant that closed years ago. She spoke with a steady tone, not dramatic, only clear about how long she has carried the same routine of careful budgeting and adjusting each month to higher costs. Her remark captured what many older residents across central and southern Illinois describe a slow, persistent effort to make limited resources last. Daily hardship shows itself in simple ways. Alma uses a small notebook to track which items she can afford each week. She walks to the pharmacy because the local bus service reduced its routes, and the remaining stops do not align with her schedule. She said some neighbors remain hopeful, but many others have grown quiet about their expectations. A few talk about leaving, but most know they cannot move easily at their age. Several households stay cautious rather than optimistic, waiting to see whether the next few years bring any stability. An anchor fact outlines the background. State and independent fiscal reports from 2024 place Illinois among the states with the highest unfunded pension obligations and combined city-state debt per resident. These obligations require large annual payments. When revenue slows, the state must reduce other services or raise taxes to keep the system functioning. Residents like Alma see the downstream effects. Local governments extend maintenance cycles. Some county health departments operate fewer clinics. A number of school districts adjust their staffing to manage limited budgets. Government help has reached many communities. Federal recovery funds supported road repairs, broadband expansion, and a few healthcare programs. The state increased pension contributions and made steady payments instead of delaying them. Selected towns received grants for downtown rehabilitation and small business support. These steps offered real assistance. They kept some services open and prevented deeper cuts. The question becomes whether these measures created enough improvement. Many residents say the relief was noticeable at first, but faded as costs rose. Property taxes remain high in several counties. Insurance premiums increased for many households. Public transit options did not expand. Infrastructure projects move forward, yet progress varies. Some communities report strong gains, while others feel little difference. In several rural areas, the number of available healthcare workers remains low, limiting hours and appointment slots. Households feel these gaps, especially older residents who depend on consistent access. Present conditions reflect a mix of modest progress and ongoing strain. Employment has improved in certain metropolitan areas, but lagged in older industrial regions. Retail corridors in mid-sized towns experience frequent turnover. Local governments continue to balance tighter budgets with rising service demands. The near-future outlook suggests small gains if national conditions remain steady, but limited room for relief if a downturn deepens in 2026. Near sunset, Alma left the store and walked along a quiet side road toward her home. The light thinned across the pavement, and the houses on her block had not yet switched on their porch lamps. She moved forward at a slow, steady pace, carrying the same calm persistence she showed earlier, and the long road extended before her. Number 5. Hawaii. Major decisions in Hawaii over the past several years have not matched the scale of the state's housing infrastructure and service capacity problems. The gap between policy goals and daily outcomes continues to widen, and the effects reach residents across all islands. System pressure appears in several forms. Housing costs remain high for workers in education, healthcare, and service sectors. Transportation between islands carries consistent expense-limiting mobility for both residents and essential goods. Public agencies operate with thin staffing, and departments responsible for basic services report difficulty filling long-term positions. These conditions make stability difficult, but the central issue lies in choices that did not address the underlying limits of the state's capacity. A major policy misstep has been the slow response to the housing shortage. For more than a decade, state and county leaders announced targets for affordable units, yet construction rarely met those targets. Permitting delays, high project costs, and limited land availability slowed the pace. Many workers, including teachers, continue to spend a large portion of their income on housing. Some relocate farther from their workplaces or share homes with extended family to manage expenses. Another wrong move involves the design and implementation of long-term infrastructure plans. After severe fires and storms, recovery concentrated on immediate needs, but efforts to strengthen evacuation routes, utility corridors, and communication systems advanced unevenly. Several communities waited extended periods for repairs, and temporary fixes remained in place longer than intended. These delays leave households with limited confidence in the resilience of essential systems. Daily service exposure reflects these decisions. Families face higher transportation costs and inconsistent access to healthcare. Some clinics operate fewer days because staffing remains low. A number of parents work multiple jobs, reducing the time available to meet with schools. Marissa adjusts her work schedule around irregular attendance patterns, often linked to housing constraints or long commutes. She explains these conditions without frustration, but they reveal how policy choices impact basic routines. State records from early 2024 document several of these pressures. Staffing gaps persist in healthcare and education. Energy costs remain high. Infrastructure projects continue but frequently encounter delays due to budgeting issues or limited contractor availability. These figures align with the experiences described across major islands. In my view, the near future outlook depends on whether the state corrects these patterns. Housing supply must increase at a pace that aligns with worker needs. Infrastructure planning requires clear timelines and sustained funding. Public systems need stable staffing to maintain reliable service. If national conditions weaken in 2026, the state's dependence on tourism and imported goods will amplify existing stress. Hawaii carries potential for improvement, but the next few years will show whether decisions change quickly enough to support households that have already adjusted more than once. Number 6, Massachusetts. A budget only stretches so far before the choices turn difficult, a county finance officer in Worcester said during a review meeting earlier this year. His name is Daniel Herrera. He has worked in local government for more than 20 years and has watched how the state's higher costs and shifting population affect even well-run counties. His remark reflects how many officials describe the situation: steady work, growing pressure, and limits that become clearer each quarter. Structural weakness shows through several points. Operating expenses for counties rise faster than revenue. Employee healthcare costs increase each year. School districts request additional support to cover transportation, special education services, and building maintenance. Utility costs affect nearly every department. These demands require consistent funding, and most counties enter the new fiscal cycle without much flexibility. Daniel noted that several departments postponed equipment replacement again because budgets could not absorb another large purchase. An anchor fact illustrates the strain. State migration data from 2024 show Massachusetts losing tens of thousands of residents to other states over a 4-year period. Outmigration reduces income tax collections and raises the share of fixed costs that remaining households must cover. When combined with high housing prices and elevated cost of living, the loss of residents places heavier responsibility on fewer taxpayers, making county-level planning more complicated. Exposure becomes evident in daily services. Some towns have reduced library hours. Several fire departments operate with lean staffing, requiring mutual aid assistance more often. Rural healthcare centers report difficulty filling long-term nursing positions. Public works crews in some municipalities spread fewer workers across larger areas, slowing routine maintenance. Residents experience these changes quietly but consistently. A road takes longer to resurface. A clinic opens less often. A school trims its after-hours programs. None of these shifts happen dramatically, but each one affects how stable a community feels. Human texture completes the picture. One parent in Springfield said her family's monthly budget leaves little room once rent, utilities, and transportation costs are covered. She keeps an eye on school district updates to see whether bus routes will change again. She said she does not blame local staff because they have worked under tight conditions for years, but she worries about how her children's schedules will adjust if more cuts arrive. Her account matches what officials describe systems working hard but with little margin. Massachusetts faces a set of challenges as 2026 approaches. High housing costs discourage new workers from settling in the state. Outmigration reduces revenue growth. Staffing shortages in healthcare and education limit service capacity. Infrastructure projects continue but feel the weight of higher material and labor costs. If the national economy slows further, consumer spending may weaken, reducing sales tax receipts and complicating municipal budgets. Counties will need to manage pension obligations, employee contracts, and rising operating expenses without reliable growth. Daniel's observation returns to mind. The budget stretches, but only to a point. 2026 will test how far that point can reach as the state enters a period marked by slow population growth, high costs, and increasing pressure on public systems. Number 7, New Jersey. New Jersey enters this period with systems that no longer match the strain placed on them. Roads show delayed maintenance. Transit runs with tighter schedules. Local services operate under staffing limits. These conditions form the backdrop for residents who move through the state each day without expecting improvements to arrive soon. Daily exposure makes the situation clear. Morning commuters wait longer for buses that once arrived more frequently. Several trains run with fewer cars, creating crowded platforms. Some towns reduced recycling pickups. A number of clinics adjusted appointment hours because they cannot maintain full staffing. Residents see these changes not as sudden shocks, but as part of a slow shift in how the state functions. One commuter described planning each week around the possibility of delays, leaving home earlier and returning later because reliability feels thinner than it used to be. An anchor fact underscores this pressure. Financial analyses from 2024 place New Jersey among the states with the highest long-term obligations and one of the largest taxpayer burdens. The state's pension liabilities and bonded debt require substantial annual payments, and revenue growth does not rise fast enough to provide comfort. These commitments limit how much can be directed toward transit infrastructure or local programs. Structural weakness follows this pattern. High housing costs push workers farther from their jobs. Outmigration reduces the number of households contributing to revenue. Municipal budgets must stretch across rising expenses for utilities, personnel, and upkeep. Several counties depend on narrow commercial bases that shift quickly during economic changes. When revenue slows, the burden transfers to residents through increased property taxes or reduced services. This cycle repeats often with few signs of relief. The past creates an emotional gap. Many older residents remember a time when New Jersey's transportation network felt reliable, when local businesses stayed open longer, and when public services arrived with less delay. Neighborhoods had stable staffing in schools, libraries, and recreation centers. Transit schedules aligned with work hours. Families felt confident that programs would continue each year. These memories highlight the distance between then and now. The contrast intensifies the sense of loss not because the past was perfect, but because it felt predictable. Present consequences sit on top of this history. Commuters navigate routes that change with short notice. Parents adjust childcare arrangements when schedules shift. Older households monitor property tax increases that strain fixed incomes. Local governments announce trimmed hours or paused projects. Residents adapt, but the adjustments add up. Several describe the feeling of living in a state that works harder to provide the same level of service it once offered with less effort. Looking ahead to 2026, challenges remain clear. Pension obligations will continue to require large payments. Transit systems will face rising operating costs. Municipalities will manage higher expenses for healthcare, energy, and labor. Outmigration may persist if housing affordability does not improve. Without focused intervention that addresses these underlying forces, New Jersey will continue moving further away from the reliable, well-supported identity many residents remember. Number 8. Connecticut. For a state that looks wealthy on paper, the numbers do not help much on a weekday. A small business owner in New Haven said, while checking inventory near closing time. His name is Robert Felton. He runs a hardware store his family has operated for 3 generations. His dry remark captures a gap that appears often in Connecticut's strong averages, uneven daily conditions. Structural weakness sits behind that gap. Operating costs remain high for employers and households. Commercial rents increase steadily. Insurance premiums strain small businesses. Property taxes rise across many towns. These pressures affect companies of all sizes, but smaller firms feel them first. Robert said he spends as much time reviewing expenses as he does managing customers. He uses fewer outside suppliers because transportation adds too much cost. Several other shop owners along his street share similar adjustments. An anchor fact frames this strain. Fiscal watchdogs place Connecticut among the states with the highest per-resident debt burden, including substantial unfunded pension obligations. These long-term commitments require steady payments, leaving fewer dollars for transportation upgrades, business area improvements, or expanded community services. When combined with slow population growth and limited migration inflow, the financial structure becomes hard to support without rising taxes. Exposure shows up in daily routines. Some towns reduced hours at their permit offices. Road repairs take longer to begin. Bus routes in certain areas operate on limited schedules. Local health departments report difficulty hiring qualified staff. Residents adjust by planning earlier, driving farther, or waiting longer. Robert keeps a calendar for supply deliveries because delays have become common. He describes these changes without frustration, just as facts that shape how the store works. Human texture adds another layer. One customer who visits Robert's store regularly said he moved in with relatives because rent increased twice in 2 years. Another said the town library reduced evening hours, making childcare arrangements more complicated. A contractor mentioned that he now accepts fewer jobs because fuel costs and supplier delays affect his schedule. These accounts illustrate how households and workers manage conditions that do not appear in broad economic summaries. An expert from a regional policy center commented that Connecticut's strong income averages mask long-standing structural burdens that slow progress even in stable years. The statement fits what Robert and other business owners describe. Towns with higher incomes can maintain services while older industrial areas struggle with depopulation, aging buildings, and limited commercial activity. The contrast shapes how evenly or unevenly residents experience stability. As Connecticut moves toward 2026, signs of recovery remain limited. Some sectors report modest hiring, but high costs persist. Outmigration reduces the number of households supporting local budgets. Infrastructure plans advance slowly due to funding constraints. Business owners continue adjusting their operations to stay open. Robert locked his store at the end of the day and said he hopes the next few years ease the pressure, but he has not seen enough change to count on a clear turnaround. Number 9. New York. A recent state financial review noted that New York's long-term obligations continue to exceed revenue growth across multiple budget cycles. The assessment outlined exposure in debt service, pension commitments, and healthcare spending, establishing a baseline that frames the state's current condition without requiring interpretation. New York's historical position has shaped national expectations for decades. The state has long functioned as a center of finance, media, and higher education. Its role in trade law and corporate headquarters built an image of institutional strength. For much of the 20th century, population density, large tax bases, and high corporate activity positioned New York as a core driver of national economic output. This legacy continues to influence how observers view the state, even as underlying pressures have shifted. An anchor fact highlights the transition. Independent fiscal monitors reported in 2024 that New York holds one of the highest per-resident debt loads in the country, alongside substantial pension and retiree health liabilities. These obligations require sustained payments that grow faster than revenue in several years. As a result, the state enters each budget period with limited flexibility and elevated fixed costs. Present fiscal exposure is visible across multiple categories. Medicaid spending accounts for a significant share of the budget and increases annually. Operating costs for transit systems rise due to maintenance needs and staffing requirements. School aid formulas expand in response to enrollment patterns and district demands. State agencies report persistent pressures in corrections. Public health and social service programs, each requiring stable funding streams. Revenue growth, however, shows slower movement due to outmigration, reduced commercial occupancy in major cities, and uneven business recovery. Structural weakness connects these trends. Office space utilization in New York City remains below pre-pandemic levels, affecting property tax collections and related municipal revenues. Transit ridership has not returned to earlier peaks, limiting fare box recovery and increasing reliance on state subsidies. Housing supply imbalances contribute to elevated costs, which influence workforce retention in essential sectors. Outmigration to lower-cost states reduces the number of higher-income earners who historically supported a substantial portion of tax receipts. Service capacity strain follows. Transit agencies must balance rising expenses with uncertain ridership patterns. Municipalities adjust capital improvement timelines to manage limited resources. Statewide infrastructure requires ongoing investment in bridges, water systems, and transit hubs, yet budget constraints delay or stagger project schedules. Public sector staffing shortages in healthcare, education, and transportation create additional operational challenges, raising the difficulty of delivering consistent service. The resulting contrast forms an ironic gap between New York's past and current conditions. A state known for scale density and economic leadership now faces vulnerabilities rooted in fixed obligations, slower revenue growth, and high service demands. The disparity between historical expectations and present realities defines the state's position more than individual indicators alone. The near-term outlook for 2026 depends on several factors: national economic performance, commercial real estate trends, federal funding allocations, and the pace of statewide infrastructure execution. If revenue growth remains slow and outmigration persists, New York will continue balancing high fixed costs with constrained flexibility. The state enters the coming period with recognized strengths, but limited room for additional stress. Number 10. California. California's latest comprehensive financial review reported a statewide budget exposure measured in tens of billions of dollars, combining operating deficits, rising program costs, and multi-year obligations that outpace projected revenue. This figure establishes a baseline with consequences extending beyond the state itself. For decades, California functioned as a central engine of national output. Its technology sector shaped global markets. Its agricultural production supplied a significant share of the country's food supply. Its ports processed international trade at volumes unmatched by any other state. Population size, corporate concentration, and research capacity placed California in a category that influenced federal revenue, labor patterns, and national consumer demand. Any shift in its stability carries effects far outside its borders. An anchor fact outlines the structural reality. Independent fiscal monitors in 2024 noted that California holds one of the largest levels of unfunded liabilities in the country, including pension healthcare and long-term infrastructure commitments. Combined with slowing population growth and reduced income tax collections, these obligations create a sustained imbalance that cannot be corrected quickly. Structural exposure has deepened. Outmigration continues, particularly among middle-income households and workers in essential sectors. Office space utilization remains well below the levels recorded before the pandemic, affecting commercial property revenue in major metropolitan regions. State economists report softened growth in several high-yield industries, narrowing the tax base that previously supported expansive programs. Revenue remains significant in absolute terms, yet its volatility and concentration reduce predictability. Systemic cost drivers intensify the pressure. Healthcare expenditures rise each year due to demographic shifts and program expansions. Housing-related funding demands increase as affordability challenges widen across multiple counties. Energy wildfire mitigation and water management obligations require long-term investment cycles that cannot be deferred without increasing risk. The state's reliance on personal income tax from high-earning households adds further exposure given the sensitivity of that revenue stream to economic fluctuations. Sector-level pressure follows. Transit agencies face elevated capital and operating costs. School systems navigate budget adjustments linked to declining enrollment. Local governments absorb rising expenses for public safety drought planning and infrastructure maintenance. Agricultural regions contend with water allocation limits and regulatory compliance costs. Ports operate in a competitive global shipping environment where small disruptions alter statewide logistics. Each sector carries its own set of obligations and all require funding increases that exceed typical revenue growth. These combined factors create national ripple risks. California's technology sector affects equity markets, investment flows, and employment trends across the country. Agricultural output influences pricing for major food categories. Port activity determines supply chain timing for multiple states. If fiscal conditions tighten, further reduced state spending could affect contractors, research institutions, and service networks that operate across state lines. Federal agencies monitor these indicators closely because instability in California amplifies uncertainty nationwide. A 2026 stress scenario highlights the exposure. If national economic growth slows, personal income tax receipts would likely contract, widening budget gaps. Commercial real estate markets could weaken, further reducing local and state collections. Water management costs may rise due to ongoing climate patterns. Multi-year infrastructure and wildfire prevention projects would require funding levels difficult to sustain under lower revenue. These outcomes place California in a position where both scale and obligation elevate risk. California enters the approaching period as the most consequential state in this assessment, large, influential, and carrying structural pressures that exceed those found elsewhere with limited margin if national conditions deteriorate. The conditions outlined across these 10 states form a clear pattern. Structural weaknesses, long-term obligations, rising operating costs, and uneven revenue growth now shape how each jurisdiction enters 2026. Some states face shrinking populations. Others carry high debt loads, volatile tax bases, or service networks strained by staffing limits. The exact pressures differ, but the direction is consistent. Systems operate with less margin than they once had. This assessment is not a forecast of collapse, but a recognition of exposure. When national conditions tighten, states with narrow buffers absorb stress earlier and more sharply. Households feel the results through slower services, delayed maintenance, and reduced program capacity. Agencies adjust, but adjustments cannot replace stability. As we close this review, the central point remains unchanged. Understanding these vulnerabilities allows viewers to track early signals, maintain awareness, and prepare for a period that may test state systems more than recent years.
This video does not promote division within the United States or encourage segregation. All content is presented for the purpose of exploration, analysis, and fostering discussion based on current events, public sentiment, and social trends. We fully respect the United States Constitution and all federal regulations. If today's analysis made you think, drop a comment so we can keep the conversations going. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you will never miss our next independent deep dive.